geeks! We finally made it across the mountains and forded those rivers to get into the Oregon territory proper.
Look, everybody. The sun is rising over the great Willamette Valley.
It's beautiful!
No one died of dysentery, though that awkward moment when our two leads tried to kill each other just right outside of Misery is still being dealt with in mostly healthy ways, I think. Moving on from there, I have a whole slew of thoughts and observations about the latest chapters dropped of Wind and Truth. Full spoiler warning for all tour-released Cosmere content and, for what it's worth, Peter Pan. Dig it! Ma's antics with the shovel gave me total flashbacks to my post-hole digging days for the Boy Scouts. It makes me realize how incredibly fragile those shin wooden homes must be, because not only are they made of wood, they also couldn't drop stones or cement into their support pole structures to make it sturdier. They must have mad tamping skills at least, but still, I would not trust those in a Midwestern store, let alone a high store. They also probably won't be able to build cities because that requires 3 ore and 2 wheat, nor could they get a development card. Though Shin infrastructure definitely presses the edge of my suspension of disbelief, Zeth's family's reaction to another holy stone on their property is completely believable.
Hey, X. I think I might have found something.
It is so relatable that the family would not want to leave and move from the only home that Zeth has ever known. And he loves it, but he also wants to do what is right. I think that Neturo is trying to respect his son's conscience as he gives Zeth the decision, but maybe as a father he could have given him less of a high-stakes, morally charged situation to teach him about ambiguity. Since Zeth clearly hasn't picked that nuance up yet, and spoilers, he won't get it for at least another 25 years. How could they all want it if it wasn't right? Maybe they saw something he didn't. Maybe he was broken. But if so, they should have simply told him what they intended to do and then done it. That would be fine. Why give him the choice? Didn't they see that made this his fault? Yeah, young Zeth is clearly living in a black and white world in more ways than the dress code. Now, I don't know if the rock antics is exactly what's going to get his family into trouble, but Zeth seems perfectly willing to take up the moral culpability for whatever situation he finds himself in. It's important to recall from Zeth's interlude in Rhythm of War that his family doesn't freely choose to become honor blade bearers, and that though young Zeth now uses terms of blessing and honor about those monasteries, older Zeth has different words for it. A simple time before his family had been given to the honor blades, before his gentle father had been taught to kill, to subtract. I can't say for certain if this moving of the rock is going to be the transgression that causes Zeth's family to fall from grace. Neturo seems to think he can buy the farmer off with some cake. However, trope-wise, the farmers and the herdsmen ain't been friends, and one group's willingness to bend the law rather than break it might spell disaster for Zeth and his family, teaching him that golden rule that he still lives by: to always follow the rules.
But duty is before all!
This week's addition to the fourth parable from the in-world Way of Kings makes Noadon's position in Alethi hierarchy that much more confusing, as he seems to maintain that it was right and his duty even to have walked away from the throne. I do not have answers, and there always will be some who denounce me for this decision I made. But let me teach a truth here that is often misunderstood. Sometimes it is not weakness, but strength to stand up and walk away. Now, in the abstract, this is pretty standard moral formation stuff that would have really helped young Zeth as his family was peer pressuring him to move a rock.
So, yes, if you see Rosa jump off a cliff, by all means, jump off a cliff.
But if we consider the historical Noadon as a political king, and as a few of you in the comments pointed out last week, this seems very at odds with the rest of the morals written into the Way of Kings that seem to indicate that kingship or leadership is a giant burden that one must carry. It need not be carried alone, but it shouldn't be set down? The monarch is like this man, stumbling along, the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. Many give way before him, but few are willing to step in and help carry the stone. They do not wish to attach themselves to the work, lest they condemn themselves to a life full of extra burdens. Though even in the parable of the boulder, it's not clear if Noadon helped the man carry the thing for a little bit together, or if he just carried it for the man a little bit. And at a certain point, what difference would it make? Now, if we consider the historical Noadon as a political king of Abamabar, even if he took the title of king when he walked to Urithiru for months away from civilization, pretty clearly he must have left someone to do the day-to-day ruling of the city, lest any old tyrant sweep in and fill the power vacuum.
He sits alone on a giant throne, pretending he's the king.
Whether his appointed one was named steward or a new king in their own right doesn't really matter for a thoughtful man like Noadon, who would have still seen it as him abandoning his kingly duties to go on a journey. Of course, once his family found him again at Urithiru, they may have cajoled him into taking up that fallen title again. My family traveled to Urithiru via the direct method and had been awaiting me for weeks. When I arrived, once I revealed myself, I was carried away, primped, fed, worried over, and scolded in precisely that order. But the Noadon that Dalinar meets in his later vision, the one who jumps out of windows to go buy bread ingredients, even Dalinar doesn't quite think he is acting the role of reigning sovereign at this time. Though some people in the market recognized their king, his passing didn't cause much of a stir. They entered a tent where a merchant was selling exotic grains. The man bustled over and hugged Noadon in a way that should have been improper for a king. If contemporary Alethi have confused Noadon's position to having his wife write the Way of Kings, then it seems very likely that the distinction that Noadon was a king who abdicated to go for a walk and then became King Emeritus, where he wrote his life's work, is a distinction that would not have lasted from the Shadow Days. Heck, I think that some people are already forgetting which books Benedictus XVI wrote as Pope and which he wrote as Pope Emeritus. So, I don't think there's anything supernaturally wrong with Noadon, as some of you have theorized in the comments. I think he's just a man, and those are weird enough, let's face it. Mutiny by the bounty hunter. Maurice has always seemed almost too cool to be a purely evil Sanderson villain. The man has an AVR chicken. An evil AVR chicken, but that's because he's a pirate.
We prefer to think of ourselves as high-risk traders.
He has impeccable taste in clothing, which makes him very cool, but he also kept Lift in a cage. Though that's understandable because he is
pirate.
So it's exciting to see that underlying contradiction within Mraize to bubble up to the surface as he remains the fiercely devoted first mate of the most ruthless pirate queen in the intercosmere system, who doesn't totally oppose Shallan, at least not like his boss does. Vale thought. He's thinking about how we surprised him by sneaking in here, and how bold we are to stand here, staring down that weapon. We don't have to be enemies, she said to him. You aren't my enemy, Mraize said. You're my obstacle. Yatel shifted. She's going to shoot. Now, I don't like to make positive predictions because those hurt so much more when they are wrong. Yet, let me make an observation. Shmi, yes, that Shmi, defected to Tiger Lily's people at the end of Peter Pan in most versions, and in most versions, Shmi was always willing to defect over to Wendy given the right proposition.
See here, I'll save you, if you promise to be my mother.
Though if Mraize said those words exactly to Shallan, Wind and Truth would be a very different story. And yet there's also that trope of pirates for the first mate to lead a mutiny against the captain.
Oh, he won't use it though, save on one man. He's mutinous first mate.
So I merely observed that there is strong literary precedent for a character like Mraize to mutiny against his captain upon the opportune moment. And even more so for him to begin a redemption arc now that he's a radiant of sorts. Surge of transportation. I guess we won't need a light weaver to betray Shallan just yet. At least not to get the ghost bloods into the cognitive realm. As it appears that Yatil or Mraize or that other guy have achieved that surge already with their new spren from Sajanat. Then he, Yatil, and Liek, who had been lingering, vanished. The air around them warped with a light tinged black-violet, and they were gone. This description more or less matches what Yasna is said to do when she else calls. The air in front of him blurred as if heated in a ring near the ground. A streak of light spun around the ring, forming a wall 5 or 6 feet high. It faded immediately. Really, it was just an after image, as if something glowing had spun in a circle very quickly. In the center of it appeared Yasna Kulin, standing tall. The process is similar, but still different. The violet-black light indicates Sajanat's influence that may change how the regular spren, who can perform the surge of transportation, such as ink spren or reachers, would work for a normal radiant. Now the question is, of those two types of spren, which would, 1, be willing to work with Sajanat, and 2, willing to work with humans? On the one hand, Reachers, those captains of ships in Shadesmar, would be an excellent companion for the interdimensional band of bandits, who are the Ghostbloods, complete with distinctive fashion sense. The Will Shapers contain many gregarious and even flamboyant characters who make their own way, taking the path they chose. They are united through a love of building. Some consider building of society to be more important than the building of structures. Yet, what we know of Venli's Reacher Spren Timber, she was not at all okay with Mraize and Yatil putting Lift in a box. In fact, it seemed anathema to the very nature of Reacher Spren and Will Shaper ideals. So it's hard for me to see even an enlightened Reacher Spren be down to bond with a person who did something like that and hadn't repented. Even Gliss Renarin's Spren isn't opposed to the ideals of Miss Spren and Truth Watchers. He's just a Truth Watcher with a different perspective. Now, for Mraize and Yatil, they weren't yet radiant, and maybe they have changed.
Remember, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step.
But I would still not rule out the possibility that they became Else-Callers, bonding Inkspren. After all, Blended the Inkspren at Adolin's trial floated the idea that her kind would be willing to work with Odium. You will encourage us to return to the Singers. They betrayed us long ago, but never on the scale of the humans. Perhaps the High Spread have the correct idea of joining with the armies of the Fused. And yet, while Blended appears to be open-minded about working with Odium, she still remains adamantly closed-minded on working with humans and indicates that the rest of her race think likewise. However, we know there's at least one objector in Ivory who was willing to bond Yasna without an Unmaid's influence. Not to mention that I think Mraize's ideal of becoming the apex predator would be very attractive to an Inkspren.
I wanna be the very best, like no one ever was.
Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Which enlightened order of radiance have the Ghostbloods joined? Have they joined more than one, or have they bonded a corrupted Seote?
When we die, our bodies become the grass, and the antelope eat the grass.
Back in present-day Shinovar, Kaladin is displaying more of those therapy skills he honed through the School of Hard Knocks in Bridge 4, and trying to get Zeth to talk about his past. However, Zeth seems more eager to pose for the promo art instead. Zeth glanced at him and shook his head. Something is wrong here. Not the things you see with a Stonewalker's perspective, Kaladin. Look, does that region seem darker than it should? The cliff sides of the mountain were darker than the stones and soil around it, but there was no visible cloud to cause that shadow. Kaladin narrowed his eyes and thought he could see wisp of blackness rising from it. So it's the monastery and not the town that's going to be the site of their standoff with the Unmaid. I do find it ironic, or perhaps telling, that the monastery devoted to the most stalwart of heralds who never broke is the first, or perhaps worst, breaker and betrayer to Odium's forces now that the true desolation has begun. Though maybe it's fitting, since their monastery never got one of those fancy honor blades that gave the wielders magic powers, so when someone came knocking to offer them great power, they took it. Though apparently Zeth says that it wasn't that bad when he was a kid. That darkness, Kaladin said, reminds me of the darkness around the Kolinar Palace. An Unmaid lived there. You really met one here in Shinovar? Yes, Zeth said softly. When was this? Kaladin said, after you discovered a rock on your family's ground? The meeting was much later. Which which tracks with what we've learned so far about the history of the Unmade in recent ages. I believe Sajanat revealed that she was awakened when Odium's influence reached the cognitive or spiritual realm of Roshar. So it follows that this Unmade's influence would have been subtle, like the thrill in Alethkar, growing steadily and steadily more prominent throughout our hero's childhood. Not that Zeth really wants to dive into his childhood because it's a distraction or whatever, but Kaladin has other plans.
Would anyone like some stew? Would anyone like some stew?
I have full confidence that Kaladin will succeed on this one and get us one step closer to learning the fate of poor Molly the Ewe, who is really the only character I care about in Zeth's flashbacks. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. What are you looking forward to before all of the excrement hits all the whirly machines? Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for watching. Bye!